Hello, and welcome to Dr. Carlos Moore Online Teaching University. Now, the aim of his videos is to make all of his teaching available freely worldwide via the internet. More messages from Dr. Moore will be added over time as he is so directed by God himself. Now, Dr. Moore is pleased to offer you these free videos because this is his ministry and it's available to you with no cost. Now, after listening to the videos, if you have been blessed by his teachings, we invite you to be a partner in his ministry through your monthly or one-time financial donation to support his work. You can make all donation checks or money orders payable to Dr. Carlos N. Moore, P.O. Box 871, Sefner, Florida 33853. Dr. Moore believes in the Holy Bible and has committed himself as a life coach to assist in positively changing lives of others by using his four-step fitness model, which consists of being spiritually fit, mentally fit, financially fit, and let's say physically. Did I say physically already? So it should be spiritually fit, mentally fit, physically fit, and financially fit. Also, Dr. Moore invites you to visit his bookstore at lulu.com. That's LULU.com. There you can purchase many more of his books. So let's get started. ADD or ADHD. Two sets of human behaviors, physical and spiritual. Today's lecture will cover both of these disorders. ADD stands for Attention Deficit Disorder, and ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Now, how should a Christian view ADD and ADHD? ADD and ADHD are terms which describe conditions associated with a particular set of behaviors. I remember my son, when he was in school, the teacher would often call me and say that my son had ADD or ADHD. Now, of course, they are not trained to be medical professionals, but we have to be very careful that we do not allow an untrained person to classify our children. If you didn't know, by that classification, the school actually receives more funding per child that's diagnosed with this disease. Now, the bad part about this is that your child may develop some type of low self-esteem about him or herself. So we won't get into that right now, but I just wanted to mention that you need to follow up whenever your child is diagnosed as having one of these disorders. Now, there are generally both physical and spiritual implications associated with those who have been diagnosed with either of these conditions. Much of the research and debate on this issue centers around physical causes and potential cure or care for the condition, usually in the form of medication. However, in that the essence of the condition involves behavior that the Bible addresses, it's very important for Christians to consider the spiritual impact on those diagnosed with ADD or ADHD. So now let's take a look at people who are inattentive and can't concentrate. I'm sort of like this when I go to certain meetings around the city. They probably think I have one of these disorders. But ADD tends to describe these individuals wrestling with inattention. Now, the dictionary describes inattention as possessing some or all of the following, which often makes careless mistakes in schoolwork, work, or other activities. Often have difficulty sustaining attention in tasks or play activities. Often does not seem to listen when spoken to directly. Often does not follow through on instructions and fails to finish schoolwork, chores, duties in the workplace. And some adults, by the way, also has this disorder but has not been diagnosed. Another indication of a person with this disorder, they have difficulty organizing tasks and activities. They often avoid dislikes or is reluctant to engage in tasks that require sustained mental effort. They also lose things necessary to complete a task or activity. And lastly, they often are easily distracted by some type of external stimuli. Is that, let me see if I can break this down for you. See, a person that suffers from this disorder, let's say they're in a classroom and there's a window in the classroom. And let's say your child often daydreams when they look out that window. Well, to be honest with you, it is the teacher's job to notice this type of inattentiveness and maybe move the child to a different place within the classroom. All right. Now, people who display a high level of energy, we call these type of people ADHD. And now these type of people, they wrestle with inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. Now, a lot of people say, well, Dr. Moore, you have ADHD. And I said, well, I may have. Now, for me, it works out to be a positive move. When I was in the military, by the way, if you don't know, I retired from the United States Air Force. I served for 21 years. I went to 12 to 16 countries. And that ADHD, if I do have it, it helped me because it kept me sort of on a high. I had a lot of energy that I wanted to complete a lot of tasks. Today we call that multitasking. So the question is, if you're a multitasker, would you basically say you have ADHD? Now, these individuals may have some of the characteristics, and let me name a couple of them. They fidget with their hands or feet. They squirm in their seats. They leave their seat while in a classroom, besides going to the restroom. They often run or climb excessively. To me, that sounds like a healthy child. Now, they often have difficulty playing or engaging in leisure activities. They often are on the go. It's like they're driven by an internal motor and you can't shut them down. They talk excessively. They blurt out answers before someone calls upon them. They have difficulty waiting their turn. They often interrupt or intrude on others while engaged in a conversation. Now, I know that that sounds familiar to a lot of you, but let's be true about this. As adults, do we display any of those characteristics? And if so, do we have ADHD? So let's move on. Undoubtedly, there are various reasons why individuals are diagnosed with ADD or ADHD. However, in cases where the evidence rests primarily on the behavior of the individual, the supreme authority, the Bible, should be consulted. Let me say that again. We should seek medical advice because Dr. Luke, if you didn't know, was a medical doctor. But as a Christian, all ultimate authority should be the Holy Bible, because the Bible is not silent on many of the above behaviors that I just described to you. Let me give you a list of some biblical teaching concerning the issue of attentiveness. God recognizes that some tasks are hard, yet it is good for us to be faithful with all tasks. You can find that if you look it up at Proverbs chapter 6, verse 6 through 8. You could also find a reference to this at Colossians chapter 3, verse 23. Here's another thing, too, about attentiveness. God recognizes that it is hard to stay focused, yet there are rewards for staying focused. Go look this up at Proverbs chapter 12, verse 11. Here's something else concerning attentiveness. God recognizes that it is hard to develop priorities, yet there are rewards for making good choices. For Proverbs chapter 24, verse 27. And let me just say this last one. God recognizes that it is hard to listen to instructions, but yet there are rewards for listening to those who are teaching. And let me give you a reference on that. Proverbs chapter 7, verse 24. Also, James mentioned this in chapter 1, verse 19. Now, self-control along with attentiveness is one of those behaviors that we look for in a child that's diagnosed with ADHD. Now, we typically do not exhibit self-control. It is a fruit of the Spirit, as well as which we add to our faith. The Apostle Paul described bringing his body under control as a battle. Well, as a man, I often talk to men, Christians or non-Christians. And by the way, Christianity is different from being a disciple. Christianity, the name Christian is, look at it as a title, a noun. Discipleship is a verb, adjective. It's something that you do. A disciple follows the teaching of the teacher. So as a Christian, as a disciple, we're to follow the works and the teachings of Jesus Christ. So self-control for a man, because we have a lot of things going on inside of us, we sometimes exhibit behaviors of ADHD. We always seem like we have our mind somewhere else. But Paul says that we must bring our body under control in Galatians chapter 5:23. Now the Bible encourages controlling the use of our words also, because as we know, our words, once they leave our mouth, we can't retrieve them. You see, so we have to be very careful on how we communicate with others, especially as a Christian. Now we are encouraged that to control our lives, we must control our mind. This means that if you have addiction to porno, for men or women, if you have a desire to hang out in nightlife activities such as clubs, or nothing wrong with going to a club, but if that consumes you, then you have to learn how to control your mind, and so that you can be stable in your thinking to accomplish the will of God. We must also remember now, everyone seems to call themselves Christians nowadays, but not everyone calls themselves a disciple. And the two must go together if you're seeking the kingdom. Okay? And the last subject I want to talk to you about is impulsivity. God states that there are consequences to being hasty. You know, in Proverbs chapter 21, verse 5, it speaks on this. We must not be hasty. And if we are, we're going to have to deal with these consequences, because there's value in listening before speaking. It is wise to listen to a matter before answering. Have you ever talked to someone and before you can get your words out of your mouth, they're trying to fill in the ending of that sentence? And I know if you're like me, it's disturbing. And matter of fact, when you see these people, you try to avoid them, because we call them know-it-alls, right? So if we call them a know-it-all, well, they need to check themselves. Now let's move on. Negative behaviors has positive benefits. Now that may seem strange. Typically, people focus on a negative behavior without realizing that there are positive traits behind those behaviors. For example, the daydreamer or forgetful one tends to be quite imaginative. You see, I doodle a lot. I write like what you're looking at, that positive, negative, teeter-totting on that triangle thinking. You know, we used to play this game as little children. The heaviest one would normally leave that teeter-totter on the ground. Okay? But it says he will be a positive person. Okay? With me, because I am a doodler, I'm very imaginative. I do daydream. I like to create things. Now, another behavior that people say is negative, impulsive. Now, they typically get things done. Those are the ones who says, I'm at least try to do this, even if I don't do this right. But I'm going to attempt to do this. Now, I have some people that I used to supervise, they wouldn't even make an attempt to try, because they didn't want to risk not doing it to my satisfaction. But an impulsive person, they're typically, they'll just jump in there and get it done. The hyperactive person tends to have a ample amount of energy that can turn to benefit others. Now, these are what the world would call negative behaviors. They would call your child somewhat disturbed or disorder, because they are imaginative, which is daydreaming. They're impulsive, and they have hyperactivity. Therefore, it is important that such individuals be considered for certain activities that matches their behaviors. And we'll talk about that in some future lessons, to take everything that you think is negative and let's turn it. Now, how do we redirect negative behaviors for positive results? How do we do that? Well, the behaviors that I described to you are considered signs of wisdom and maturity. Okay? Now, it is the role of the church. Let's talk about the role of the church now and not the school. It is the role of the church and the parents to help redirect the attention and energy of the individual ADD and ADHD. So let me say that again. Let's stop putting blame on school teachers, principals, bus drivers, any staff within the school system. Let's stop doing that. Let's take a look at the church. Let's take a look at the parents of these children, and let's see ways to try to discipline them, and let's see what's involved in this discipline. Number one, let's helping the individual develop a servant heart. Many of the behaviors that we listed reflect a rather selfish motive in life. So learning to serve others helps individual push through unpleasant tasks and be more patient. You know, in a book of Philippians, chapter 2, I think it's verse 3 through 4, this is talked about quite often, about the servant heart. You see, a lot of times when we're faced with difficulties, what if we say to ourselves, well, regardless of how I feel, how is this activity going to make someone else feel? If I have to be patient and I'm riled up, how do I control my impulsive behavior? Well, what if I need to serve someone and it may upset them if I still behave in this impulsive manner? So basically, we have to look outside of ourselves and see what's going to be to the best benefit of the person that we're trying to help. Now, once again, these are just ways to control your ADHD. Okay? Now, the church and parents have to help control the person thinking. Now, the Bible talks about renewing of the mind. You know, Paul talks about it in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Also in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 23. And basically he says God instructs us to focus on 8 attributes. Okay? Now, once again, when you look at that, you can go to Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. Now, those who wrestle with fantasy can be encouraged to think on things that are true. Have you ever met someone and you said, what world do you live in? Basically, what we're saying is that person has ADHD, you know, by description. But people like that, it can be used to their benefit. Those are the people who create like these imaginative type shows you see on TV. So what we're talking about is, even if someone has been diagnosed or not diagnosed, and you observe these behaviors exhibited, let's say, how do we help this person turn that negative into a positive? So, as a Christian, as a church, we can help the individual renew their minds as to what God teaches about their behavior. We can also help these individuals to establish some type of structure. That's why at the beginning of this video, I told you that I created what I call a fitness model. And it involves being spiritually fit, mentally fit, physically fit, and financially fit. And everything you do in life should fall under one of those categories. That keeps you balanced. That adds structure to your life. The Bible describes the Christian life as being a one another type experience. Okay? And let me tell you what happened. They met daily in the early church. Just go to Acts chapter 2. They met daily. And we are encouraged to motivate and encourage one another daily. I believe Paul wrote the book of Hebrews. That's out for discussion for a lot of scholars. But if you go to Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24 through 25, you'll see that we're encouraged to help one another. Because too often, we give people a pass on their behaviors when what they really need is help in changing. So we have to stop running away as loving brothers and sisters. And by the way, when I say brothers and sisters, that doesn't mean anything about the color of your skin. Because as a Christian, we are all brothers and sisters. Now, let me just get to another way we can help a person with ADHD. We can model the proper behavior. For example, the Apostle Paul modeled the behavior to young Pastor Timothy. In the book of 2 Timothy, chapter 3 through 10, you'll see that Timothy, in actuality, was Paul's disciple. See, because Paul was the teacher. Today we call this mentoring. You have a mentor and you have a mentee. As a life coach, what I do, I go out and mentor people. But see, we got to be careful now because that term now is assumed that we're talking about children. But there are adults mentors, okay? If you go to church on a regular basis, your pastor's your mentor, you see, because he's the under shepherd of the church services. The church is not the building. The church is the assembly of believers that meet to go inside of the church building. So the pastor is the under shepherd because the head of the church is Jesus Christ. So the pastor is not the shepherd. He's the under shepherd delegated by God to shepherd over you while you're on earth. But yet you are praying and giving everything to God and not that pastor. I just want you to understand the difference. But we are to respect all clergy. We shouldn't disrespect them. But yet understand ultimately everything we're doing in life is for showing thankfulness for Jesus' work. And we are saying, God, thank you for giving us your son. So that's basically what we're going to be talking about, doing a lot of series of this lesson. And today, as I said before, we're just discussing some things on ADD and the ADHD. Now, in summary, there are certain things that we can do to help people with ADHD and ADD. But however, parents, pastors, and those who work with children and adults with ADD and HDD should not be discouraged from utilizing the Word of God, which is profitable for teaching, reproving, correcting, and instructing. a man by the name of Timothy, in the book 2 Timothy 3:16, he states that the Bible are used for these four things. Okay? So let me just say teaching. For those who are in the workforce, we know that it's frowned upon to talk about Christianity. But I want to give you this last hint before I leave. Under the Title 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it prohibits discrimination on religious speech. Let me say that again. Title 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination of religious speech. And let me show you what I'm talking about. Have you ever been engaged in a conversation with maybe a co-worker about what you might have, let's say it's Monday, but you talk about what you did on Sunday at church, and someone says, hey, you can't talk about religion in this place. Well, they're wrong. Title 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is a federal act. You have to go ahead and print that act out and then show that person, because they're just stating falsehood or something they heard, but they're not really understanding that what they're saying to you is not true. And the reason why I'm saying this, because at the end of the day, I believe, my personal belief, is that the only thing that's going to stand at the end of the day, and the only thing that's going to add structure to my life and your life, is the Word of God. I'm convinced of that now. I've lived long enough to know and have tried many other things, but at the end of the day, only the Word of God is going to help us. All right, I want to thank you for joining me for this lesson. Again, my objective for creating these videos is to teach and inspire everyone to have a closer walk with God. And if you have found this video or any other video to be helpful in your walk with God, then please send us a generous donation as you are led by the Holy Spirit. Please make all donation checks or money orders payable to Dr. Carlos N. Moore, P.O. Box 871, Sefner, Florida 33583. Also, do not forget to visit Dr. Moore's bookstore at lulu.com to purchase one of his many books. I want to thank you again for joining me, and I look forward to on this next lesson. Thank you.